Hey, you guys, this is Josh with Homesteading Family. Welcome to this week's episode of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. I am excited to have my good friend and author Rory Groves here with me today. Rory is the author of two books, Durable Trades, Family-Centered Economies That Have Stood the Test of Time, and the book and subject we're going to be talking about today, The Family Economy, Rory's newest book.
Okay, so I want to take a moment to say thank you to our sponsors today for helping make this episode available to all of you. And today's sponsor is American Blossom Linens. And Carolyn and I love American Blossom Linens. They are made here in the United States. It's high quality bedding without the traditional markups. American Blossom prides itself on radical transparency and ethical factories without the use of middlemen passing those savings directly on to you. Now, they produce bed sheets. They also have organic cotton bath towels, bath towel sets, beautiful organic cotton herringbone blankets, lightweight 100% virgin wool blankets and wool-filled pillows, all made in the USA. Carolyn and I love their products. We're so thankful for them. And we want you to go check them out. So check out their website at American Blossom Linens and use the coupon code Homesteading Family, all upper caps, for 20% off.
We've got a lot to dive into. You're going to get to know Rory a little bit. He is a homesteader and a Christian and lives with his wife and 6 children on their homestead in Minnesota. And so let's catch up a little bit, and then we're going to dive into the family economy and actually some pretty deep subjects. We'll see if we can fit it all into our box today. But Rory, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Welcome to the Pantry Chat. Just excited to have you here and talk about kind of what's going on in the world today, and especially through the lens of family and where families are at, and your focus and encouragement of kind of joining families back together and focusing on this family economy concept, which I really love the language that you're putting to it. I think it resounds with me deeply, and I think it will resound with a lot of our audience today. But we always like to do a little chit chat first and just give people a little insight to what's going on in the homesteading life. And you're homesteading there in Minnesota. What does life look like for you guys right now?
Well, it's a glorious time of year up here right now. We just kind of got into the fall after the heat of the summer. It does actually get warm in Minnesota, just in case anyone was wondering. The motif that we get the most common is, how can you live up there? Isn't it cold? And yes, the answer is it's very cold up here. But we do have a growing season. It actually does get pretty hot. And by the end of August, we're ready for the seasons to change again. And so fall comes in. It's usually one of the most beautiful times of the year. We have the maple trees that are turning blaze orange and red. And we have cool, the crisp fall air where it's nice and dry and cool in the evenings. Apples are ripe. We grow a lot of apples up here on our farm. So they're ripe, ready to pick, fresh off the tree every day. We're eating apples, and it's really fun this time of year. So that's kind of what's going on right now. We're just getting back into the swing of homeschooling again. We've been doing it now, let's see, I think about 7 or 8 years. Our oldest is 13, so we started with him.
Okay.
And we have 6 kids down to a 2-year-old. So actually the most challenging part is how to homeschool with a 2-year-old toddler running around. And we will let you know if we figure that one out. But right now we have no advice to give.
There's a lot of people figuring that out.
Exactly.
You're homeschooling and homesteading.
Yes.
And young ones. Yeah, we've got an 18-month-old, so it is challenging.
Yes.
For sure. Yeah. Well, good. And you guys you do some live events there on your place to kind of train and encourage people, don't you? You had a summit just 2 weeks ago or less?
Yeah, that's right. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had what's called the Grovestead Gathering. And that was born out of, we started writing a newsletter about our farm, talking about just our homesteading journey, and started sending it out to a few friends, and people really liked it. Like, we actually sent it out in the physical mail on the post. And so we just kept getting more and more people that were interested in following along. And for us, I think from the very beginning, we've been here at our homestead 12 years. And one of the things that we've just naturally enjoyed, both my wife and I have always enjoyed just sharing with others what we're learning. Because for us, we are completely new at all of this. I mean, before we moved here, we didn't have a farming bone in our bodies. So when we would do things like tap our maple trees, we just probably the very first winter we're here, when we discovered that we actually had maple trees, we invited people over to come and learn the process with us. We did honeybee workshops. We've done canning and preserving workshops. I mean, pretty much, not unlike what you guys are doing as a homesteading family. We just really enjoyed and got a lot out of having people over to the farm to kind of learn and connect with nature. And for us, it was all just something we enjoyed doing. And then, fast forward 10 years into that, a couple of years ago, we started to really look at how could we make this part of our family economy. So in other words, we have these gifts. This suits our family. We have a venue. Would there possibly be interest in people, coming out on a regular basis to events at our farm? So we started gearing up for that. We started a nonprofit ministry as one arm of that. In other words, so we do ministry type events, faith-based ministry discipleship events here. And so that allows people to come. It's very affordable. I mean, it's like $30 for an adult, and children are free. And they come out and hang out with other homesteading families, and we study God's word together, and we encourage each other and talk about what's coming and how we can prepare. So that's the gathering that we just did a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, that's probably one of about 5 or 6 that we've done this year. So we're always looking for different ways to connect with families in the area and to encourage them. That's just one of the things that we've found, that a lot of times families who feel called in this direction, I say called because there's something else out there that's moving. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense on the face of it to just work this hard to provide your own food if you just look at the economics of a thing, right? I mean, there's a lot more to it. And so I think that people are being called. They're feeling that there's something that's not quite right. They can't depend on the supply chains or the sources of their food. And maybe there's something spiritual, a spiritual component to it. So for all of those reasons, we just think that one of the things we could do is encourage the people who are making these decisions, homeschooling, homesteading, whatever it would be, try to come alongside, encourage them, and introduce them to other families who are doing the same thing. So that's really kind of the function of our events that we host on our farm.
That is awesome. I'm obviously, we're doing a lot digitally, and we're here digitally, and I'm very thankful for the information technology that we have, because it has allowed us all to connect and share information in a way that I think has sped up this movement and people's ability to respond to that call. But nothing replaces, in-person community. And I just think it's so neat and special what you guys are doing there on your farm and opening your doors. And I think it's a great model. There's conferences now that are big and thousands of people. We go to those. It's great. But that model that you're doing is just such a neat model. If more of us could do that in our communities, a little closer, tighter knit, but in person. So I think it's great, and commend you guys. And it's awesome to see what you're doing there and opening your door and making it affordable and sharing your homestead with people.
I told Beck, I said, one of the unique things about this, one of our issues is that we're kind of constrained for size. We had about 30 families out here a couple of weekends ago, and really that's pretty much pushing it as far as what we can fit, especially homeschooling families tend to be a bit larger. And so, but we were talking about it, and we're just saying, if we were to move this into a hotel conference center or some kind of like university, rather than hosting this on a farm, it just would really lose so much of the value, because what we're doing is we're teaching about family economy inside of a family economy. Mm-hmm. And so really the best way to reach more families would just be able to have more regional events. If people were willing to host things like this on their own farms, we would be able to service people regionally and bring local community together. So obviously not everyone can drive up to Minnesota to come to our events, but it is a model that does work, and people really want to meet other like-minded people. And it's a wonderful way to do that when the subject is, education or ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you. Thanks for doing that. And of course, you're going to probably hear from some people.
Great. Yeah. Connect with us. Yeah.
But
We
I want to
actually,
encourage.
I'll actually just say right out of the gate, I mean, me and the other speaker who was here a couple of weeks ago, we were saying the time is now. We need to have more of these events around the country, and the limiting factor is venues to do it at. People that would be willing to open up their farms to host these kind of things. It's not a trivial thing. I wouldn't ask anyone to do it who hasn't had any experience in this, because it's a very big thing to take on, but there's a whole lot of blessing that comes with it.
It is a lot of work. And so I want to encourage our listeners that if, God's speaking to you, if you have a heart to think about that, get in touch with Rory, maybe go to one of theirs and learn what does that look like, because we need more people doing what you're doing on the ground at that scale that's a little bit more intimate and hands-on. But I want to get into the heart. I want to talk about this family economy in your book today, and I'm going to pivot just a little bit from what you and I talked about, Rory, because before we came on, because you talked about that call, that many of us have experienced. And I think prior to that call, though, we've experienced some other things that you talk about in your book at the beginning in chapter 1. And, you talk about this thing that happens prior to a heart attack or a stroke for people as kind of a bit of a leading into what's happening to us. And prior to these events happening, people often get this feeling that something bad is about to happen, right? And there's times when the only evidence that doctors have to go on is the symptom, clinically known as a sense of impending doom. And you go on to relate this to kind of our context today, that even though we've got every human impulse satisfied and everything seems to be working, and yet underneath it all, there's this nagging unease, right? And this foreboding. And that there is this call, there is this thing happening. I'd love you to just break that out a little bit, kind of thinking about the first chapter of your book and what's going on there.
Yeah, well, so what I try to get into a little bit is just setting the stage for what's the problem? What is this deal of the family economy, and why would we need it in this modern day and age when we have all this wealth and all this prosperity? I mean, absolutely unprecedented abundance that no generation in history prior to ours has ever seen. And then at the same time, we have like mental illness off the charts. We have loneliness as an epidemic. We have despair deaths at their all-time highs. We have all of these other indicators of societal health that's going the wrong direction, right? And so it's like, what's going on here? We've been fed a bill of goods, basically, where we have spent the last couple centuries, and this is the thing we have to realize, we're waking up into this reality. We didn't create it. We probably have had a hand in it, but we did not start this. It started a long time ago. And what I tried to do in the book is just to very briefly, I mean, just one chapter's worth, to describe some of the ways that we have broke away from the sense of the human tradition that we used to all live in and that we used to all share in, which was family-based economies. There were no corporations more than, 200, 300, 400 years ago. People worked together in families, and then you would have a village, a self-sufficient village, which was a family of families. I mean, essentially, these were people living in community, supporting each other. That's what America was built on. That's what we were founded on. And for many hundreds of years, many thousands of years, that's how all societies worked. They functioned at the family level. You would never find a family. In fact, I use this example in the book of coal miners going out and taking jobs in the coal mines, which didn't happen until the Industrial Revolution, because they didn't need coal for anything really before that. They were, I mean, I guess you could heat your house, but they didn't need it in the volumes that they needed it during the revolution. So you had men in mass leaving their farms to go work in the coal mines. Well, what happened is their families would move with them, because it was inconceivable that the family would not join dad in the work of the family business, so to speak. It was still viewed as a family economy, even though it was a solo job. Sometimes they would bring children into the mines, and some of those conditions were deplorable. But then they started doing the same thing with the wives and the daughters. They're bringing them into textile mills. And again, this was a very foreign concept, that you would take an individual out of his family or her family, put them in a factory and have them work for a salary. Completely unprecedented in world history. And when we did that, two things happened. One, efficiency went through the roof because now we were automating all of the manual labor and all of the tasks. But the second thing that happened is relationships were destroyed. I mean, we are nowhere near where we were 150, 200 years ago in terms of relational bonds within the family and cross-generational bonds.
Relationships are not efficient, are they?
The relationships are not efficient. Exactly. So by destroying relationships, you can gain efficiency and you can have a lot of stuff. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we are gaining the whole world in the process of losing our souls. This has not yielded the benefits that it was supposed to have yielded, why we all went along with this idea in the first place. Greed did not ultimately deliver the satisfaction in life that people were hoping that it would, that material abundance would. And so I go through the book and just talk about the different transformations, basically the impacts on the family over the course of the last 2 centuries. Talk about things like mechanization and specialization. This is one that's very interesting. Specialization is where, all of us used to be generalists to some extent. Every man, every woman could survive on their own, within the context of a family, and they knew how to basically provide for their own subsistence. In fact, everyone were homesteaders. That's that everyone did that. So today, and to be a homesteader, you have to be a generalist. You have to know a lot of information about a lot of different skills to make it work. Well, today, not only is that unusual, it's not very profitable to be a generalist. They're far more profitable. The salaries are much higher for a specialist who can specialize in one very narrow area of study and focus and really drill down deep into one specific area. Well, stand back for a minute and ask, what does that do to a family-based economy, right? I mean, how many wives, children, young people can join their dad in a highly specialized laboratory occupation that requires many advanced degrees? It just doesn't happen. It completely, it prohibits family involvement in the father or the mother's job. And so that's just one little element, but specialization is a natural consequence of the Industrial Revolution, of the standardization of parts, right? The factory system, that's all about specialization. That's how we get more efficient, and that's how we get more material abundance, but it comes at the cost of the family.
Yeah. What is it that's happening now that's waking us up a little bit, that's either got us questioning or calling? I think some people start questioning first, and then that calling comes. I think, but what's happening, you think, that's causing that today, where finally, a couple hundred years in, more and more people are going, this isn't right. They might not even know what yet. They might not even have the language that you have yet, but they're starting to sense that we're not on a good track.
Well, I mean, I think some of the things I mentioned about just the mental illness and the dysfunction in their families that is common, that's normal today. I mean, divorce, you have children and parents that are at odds with each other. You have a breakdown in generational faith. I make that point in the book too. There's so many aspects of church life and church programming which are focused around passing on the faith to the next generation. I've yet to see a single one that addresses the concept of the family economy as a place for discipleship, because the family economy is where the faith was passed on for thousands of years. It was when mom and dad are working with their children and their embodied faith. In other words, they're living out the faith. It's not a set of doctrines. They're living it out, and their children are seeing them. And some of the most, you would know this too, Josh, but some of the most profound conversations I ever have with my children about matters of faith and matters of life, they come when we're weeding the garden, or where we're pitching manure, or where we're installing fencing. It's just part of the natural order of things for families to be together and not be separated all the time. So anyway, I think people have had this feeling for some time, and especially the younger generations now, they're really reassessing a lot of the things that the previous generations took for granted. And it's not just a matter of going to school to get good grades so that you can get into a good college, so that you can get good grades and then hopefully graduate and get a good job, and then you can earn all this money. And some end goal off in the future is to, retire with this extra money so that you can go play golf in Florida or whatever whatever your image of happiness is. It just isn't working out. I mean, the younger generations are looking at their parents and grandparents and they're saying they worked their entire lives. They poured everything they had into this corporation, and then they just got sacked at the end of their career, right?
Mhm.
What was that for? And so they're willing to question some of these things. And you certainly can't leave out the pandemic and all of the things that happened over the course of a couple of years, all the real deep disruptions to things that people thought were steady and stable.
Yeah.
Now, I think that other people had maybe seen things coming for a while before the pandemic, and that maybe brought them out into homesteading in the first place. And so they weren't maybe as caught off guard by that. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people were caught off guard. They had never considered what it might look like for the grocery store to run out of food. And so there are elements like this where I think people are willing to investigate what are these assumptions that we're making about the happy American fulfilled life, the American dream. And is it actually the kind of dream that we want to have, or is it something other than a dream?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think the pandemic, you go back to January 2020, and if you would have said to, I think, any American and probably other places in the world that within a month or two, your government is going to be telling you where you can and cannot go, when you can and cannot go, inside, outside, and all the things that were put on us. I don't think a single person would have believed it possible to happen, especially in the United States of America. And that woke us up a bit, along with seeing the fragility of some of our centralized systems, the food system, how easily that was broken, along with many others. And then along, obviously, with the questions we all have about the medical system now. And so you're right, that was a huge catalyst, but we were heading towards it already, I think, because primarily of the degradation of the family and of the family economy. It is the original form of organization and government that God gave us. And, I want to touch for just a second before we move forward into your story, because you mentioned the church, and I really want to encourage that. Unfortunately, it's sad that the church is aided in this, because in a lot of places, the institutional side of the church has embraced age segregation, has embraced a lot of functioning for efficiency, for effectiveness, for different reasons of ministry, all well-intentioned in many ways, but that have aided in the natural progression of the family economy being broken up just by that separation and sending everybody off in different ways. And even sometimes the church supplanting family authority, dad authority, husband authority, in leadership, is probably a better word, of that family unit working together. And we need, as not just humanity, but even as a church body, to look at that and re-examine that and reapproach.
Yeah, absolutely. That's huge on my heart. I mean, our entire ministry is about passing on the faith by using the family economy as a context to do that. I just read a book, I highly recommend it to anyone, especially church leaders, called Families and Faith. And it's from a researcher out of, I believe, is Berkeley, Southern California. But he's been studying this topic for decades. And this is perhaps his final book on the subject. But he basically, they tracked 7 generations of families through surveys. It's a sociologist. And they asked them survey questions, so they're going all the way back to the World War I generation.
Wow. And
so this book is specifically teases out what happened to the faith of the different families and why. Why did faith pass on in some and not in others? And there's a lot of really interesting tidbits of information, but the one salient point for our conversation here is that it had nothing to do with church programming. It had everything to do with discipleship taking place in the context of the family. In other words, it wasn't the church that guaranteed the transmission of the faith. It was whether the family itself was practicing a vibrant faith. And the church could come alongside and aid that family. But more specifically than just the family, it was if the father was warm and affirming, this is the word they use, warm and affirming in passing on the faith to his children. And I think that what's interesting, and the author doesn't use this the scripture, but I think it's a good fit in the last verse of the Old Testament in Malachi. I think it's Malachi 4, 5, and 6. He says that in the latter days, I will send my prophet in the spirit and power of Elijah, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. And I really think that's the hinge upon which all of the rest of this swings, is that if the fathers' hearts are turned to their children, then you see generational discipleship. Then you see dads trying to come home to be present with their families. You see homeschooling, because it's another opportunity for discipleship. I'm not saying it's the only way that it has to be done, but I'm just saying these are the reasons why these other forms exist. The family economy, the homeschooling, the homesteading, these are platforms for generational discipleship. And if you want to talk about churches, the worst possible thing a church can do is divide up that family and bring in experts to try to do the discipleship. That's the worst possible thing. And in fact, even in the book, he closes out with this very recommendation to churches. He says the best thing that churches could do is facilitate times where families are together. In other words, make their events not just age segregated. Of course, he discourages that. Don't even make them intergenerational in the sense where you have young people and you have an older generation. He said, bring the families together and have family-based activities within the church. That's your best chance at actually having an impact on the future faith of those children. So anyway, science supports it, and so does the Bible, and so does reason and logic. So
he's a secular author.
Secular author, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And it's interesting. It bears out God's truth, I think.
It does.
When you have a secular person honestly looking at things. So, well, let's take a segue then into your story a little bit, because you didn't start here. You were at one point I think a computer engineer, but you can straighten me out on.
No, that's good enough.
Living in the city.
Yep.
And kind of doing status quo and what we're supposed to do, or what we're told we're supposed to do. So
right.
Where did you start, and how did the light bulb come on for you?
Yeah, well, I had been a software programmer my entire life. I worked as a contract developer. I also had my own software businesses, and that's all I was concerned with. I thought that's all I'd ever do. I loved it. But I did start to get into, I tell the story about how we started when we were living in an apartment way back when, before we had any kids. Someone donated a tomato plant to us, and we started growing this on our balcony in the apartment. And, one thing that led to another, and pretty soon we were in a house, and I had torn up all of the yard to put in raised bed gardens, because I was really getting a bug for this whole gardening thing. I just thought it was a really nice, diversion from staring at a screen. And there were some things God was starting to teach me even back then, but we still lived in the heart of the city. We were in Minneapolis. And, at some point along the way, we were growing as a family, and I was realizing that we needed more room to expand. Basically, I was interested in trying animals. I'd never had any animals before. And well, I guess we had a cat, but let's not still have cats, but it's not quite the same. But, found ourselves looking around for some farmland, just a little bit out, on the outskirts of the city. And that led one thing to another, to us really embracing a whole new way of life. And before it was all said and done, I shuttered the software business. I had gone full time into writing and teaching and farming. And the catalyst for me, which I go into a little bit in the book, but the catalyst to me was I came to kind of a juxtaposition where when I would work in the garden, I would be with my family. It just was naturally a family thing, right? The kids would be out there. We'd be planting potatoes is one of the things where I'd be hoeing the rows and the kids would be putting the potato pieces down behind me. It was something that we were all doing together. And so I would have all kinds of these experiences. Everything that we did on the farm, we were doing it together. And then I would go to I had a home office at the time, but it was in a cabin. And so I would leave my family to go to my real job, which was sitting by myself, staring at a computer screen, typing, interacting with customers and vendors, and employers that I wasn't even seeing face to face. And somehow, like, the computer was my real job, but the actual digging in the dirt with my family was the hobby, right? That's a hobby farm. And it just kind of over time began to change my perspective on what is real work. Like, the food that we grow on our farm, that's feeding us in the wintertime when we don't have any. It's feeding us when the store shelves are empty. It's work that's very meaningful. It's very connected. It's very simple. There's not so many things to break down. I'm not so reliant on all this technology. I'm not one phone call away from losing my job. It's all right here. And mostly it was just such a meaningful time to be with my family. And it was a way that they could all join me in a real job. In real work. So that began, I would say, several years into this homesteading experience, my quest to think about and to try to come up with a way that we could farm together and do this as the real job, and not me not have to leave the family in order to earn an income. And I started working through a spreadsheet of historical professions. And after I had spent a couple of months looking at this and thinking about it and reading, I learned about this concept called the family economy. I read books from authors about like C.R. Wiley, Alan Carlson, and Kevin Swanson, and some others, and just really had my eyes open to the fact that what I was pining after was not this really unusual, impossible situation that just some fancy of my mind. What I was after was actually the normal way that families used to work for most of human history. So I was going back. I was just a couple centuries late on the arrangement. So that spreadsheet of options, that's what I wanted to know. What are my options? If I'm a dad, I'm about 40 years old. I think that's when I started working on some of these books. And is any vocation left for guys like me that want to do this, with their families? And I came up with a list of about 60 trades. I call them trades, but they're just professions that survived what I consider to be the worst upheaval in human history, which is the industrialization of our economy, or the Industrial Revolution, and are still around today that people can go into. So I wrote the book. I ended up writing it called Durable Trades, Family-Centered Economies That Have Stood the Test of Time. And very honestly, Josh, this was a project for my own family. I was just trying to answer the question for us. And in the process of working this out, I thought there might be some other families who would benefit from this research.
Well, and I think while you approached it for trying to find answers for yourself as the dad, it's now a book that I think can help lead the way for young people in families like ours that are, looking to survive and thrive and eventually provide for their own family. And what do they do in this world? And without necessarily taking on $100,000 of college debt,
exactly. Yeah.
And some of the other challenges that come with building a career today. It has a lot of suggestions and answers in it. And they're not all trades like you alluded at. I think this is worth a good read for many of you listening or thinking about trying to transition yourself in your family, or thinking about the future of your kids and what they might do. It's a good read. What are some of the ones that stand out in there? And I know we're focused on the family economy, but this is a good.
No, this is it. I mean, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. So, so what I do is I go through the list and I kind of use the old-fashioned names for some of the trades. So, like apothecary is someone who used to make medicines. They used to physicians and doctors and stuff used to rely on just home remedies that they could grow in their gardens. And so there are entire industries right now of people who, they're pharmacists essentially in the what do they call that? The allopathy version of that. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of people that have viable home economies, making tinctures and salves and medicines and growing ingredients that other people can use to make medicines. And that can work as part of a family economy. So I think that's one interesting one. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most interesting and approachable or accessible vocations would be innkeeper, which is essentially that would be renting out a property, or in the modern parlance, that would be Airbnb or VRBO. I have a friend who moved out to a farm that he couldn't afford, like based on his income, but because it had an extra house on the property, he was able to rent that house out on Airbnb. And so he took possession of, I think it was a 20-acre parcel with 2 homes on it, outbuildings, and plenty of pasture and land for raising animals. And his family keeps, they're innkeepers. They keep this other property going. And he said within, even on a slow launch, it took some time to renovate the house for the first couple of months that they lived there. But he said after they started listing it, within 4 months, the property was paying for itself. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but to me, that's a pretty quick ramp up for a family business. So I think innkeeping is definitely a viable option. And there's a lot of others. Shepherd and farmer are in there. Woodworker, I think, is a very solid, someone who can get into cabinetry or furniture making. That's a great home-based business if you have a penchant for woodworking.
Yeah. Well, those are just a few ideas. You guys, we'll give you links to all this stuff in the show notes, but Durable Trades is great. Great for ideas and food for thought around this family economy. We were going to kind of work through the book, but I'm going to, again, go a little bit of a different direction in actually chapter 2 or chapter 3. You talk about being at conferences and a guy coming up to you, a dad, usually kind of wild-eyed. Everything's obviously resonated with what you've said. And the big question, and this is the question I know you hear, we hear it, and how do we begin in this modern life that we've got to exist in, to balance moving towards these ideals that are very, very good ideals and they're attainable, but we still live in a modern world, and the transition and the needs to just keep an income rolling. I get the question all the time, how do I make a living at homesteading? And homesteading is not a vacation, you guys. There's a lot of vocations you can do that work with it well, but it's in and of itself, it's not a vocation. It might lead to farming, but the how, and I think that's one of the hardest things for families to tackle and figure out is how do we make this transition? And I mean, dad still needs to work. Sometimes husband and wives are working and figuring it out, so that's a big question. Where do we start to think about that to help encourage people and see a way forward once the light bulb's on and they're trying to figure out how to put these pieces together? Where do we start thinking about that?
Well, I like the question, because if I get that question, it means that people care enough about this idea to want to try to walk it out. And that's really the first step right there. You've already accomplished the first step. Yeah. You got to have a vision for your family. And I keep coming back to that. The how is secondary, actually, in kind of a funny way. I'm going to go about it a different way, but you have to have a vision. There's got to be something that's beyond just making money or replacing an income. You have to have a vision about what your family could do or could be, or God might be calling you to do, that is unique to your family. And that really is going to take a lot of thinking. It's going to take time in prayer. It's going to take a lot of conversation with your family members, with your wife, with your spouse. One of the things I absolutely love about this, and it's true, it's we've been at this now for 5 years, and it's absolutely true, is that a family economy brings a husband and wife together in a way no other function or job can, because we are working together for the same goal. We're pushing forward in the same mission. And yeah, she has her roles and she has responsibilities, and those are different than some of mine, but we are really doing it all under the same vision. And I think that a lot of the issues that we do have when we were referring to some of the statistics earlier about marriage and some of these things, if you have two visions, this just occurred to me the other day, but we have a street in our town called Division, right? It's Division Street. A lot of towns have that. Divides the north and south of the town. And vision means two. It's two visions. And so if you're in a family with two separate visions, there's going to be division. You have to be unified. And so if you and your wife, let's just start there, can get on the same page about something. Let's not worry right now about, is it going to pay the mortgage? That's, again, this is secondary. Is there a vision that you can get on board with? Maybe there's a ministry you can start as a family. Maybe there's a business venture, or just it's something that will bring in a little bit of revenue, but it might not cover all your expenses. But can you do it together? Does it bring the family together? I would say start there. And if it's something that you have to do on the side, very much on the side, I know everyone is so swamped. That's part of the industrial situation, is to keep you so busy you can't ever leave. But if you can manage to squirrel away some investment or some time to invest in a family-based venture, start there and then let it grow. Don't try to do this all at once. I've talked to other men and fathers. For us, it took 5 years before we had something that was actually viable from when I first started pursuing this in one direction, before we could put things together. I've talked to other fathers that took them about 7 years, and now they have. The thing is it might be 7 years before it's viable and you're doing it full time. But every year thereafter, it continues to grow and multiply and grow, because more and more children are coming online in your family economy, and they're starting their own businesses.
Mhm.
They've got ambition. They're learning from mom and dad who are being entrepreneurial. So that's kind of what I would say is it's a slow ramp up, but then it's something that compounds over time. And don't burn yourself out. You're not going to do anybody any good if you burn yourself out right away, trying to do everything at once. If it's not something that can be done all at one time. We didn't get into this predicament overnight, right? We've been multiple generations have gotten us to where we are. We're just the ones that are waking up to it and saying, I don't want this future for my children. I don't want them to be saddled with debt and be
Yeah.
lonely and not have someone. I want them to have family economies when it's their turn. So this is the way I would basically phrase that.
The vision, I think, is so important. I'm so glad that you bring that out. And the old saying, you can't get to where you're going if you don't know where you're going to go, if you don't know what the destination is. And a lot of times I think we set out to do things. And you and I talked about this when we were together recently. I don't know a homesteader that's not hardworking. I don't know a homeschooler that's not hardworking, that's not willing to put in time and effort and energy and emotion. And yet sometimes we don't really quite know where we're going. And having that vision that you're talking about and being united with husband and wife and ultimately family. We get a lot of questions about how to bring kids along. And there's, I think, a lot of, there's a lot of practical how to in bringing kids along. But if you don't have a vision that you can articulate, that you can live out as a family, I think it's very hard to bring anybody along or to get along or to get anywhere. You've got to kind of know your why and what does the picture look like, so that it doesn't end up just a lot of work, because we're in this for much more than a response to a pandemic a few years ago, or for to make our life better in this moment, or in response to the political environment, or whatever it is, some of these concerns that weigh on us day to day. But what we're doing and tackling is so much deeper and wider and longer. And we need vision to see us through, to carry us through, I think.
Absolutely. I think that reminds me of a quote from William Bradford, who wrote Plymouth Plantation. He was the governor of the Pilgrims for most of his life. And he talks about their generation being as stepping stones to future generations. And I just think that's such a powerful image, that you're laying yourself down in the muck, in the water, so that someone behind you can step on you and cross over to the other side. And there's not a lot of situations where I would do that, except there is one that I would never refuse. That'd be my children.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think part of, we're resurrecting a way of thinking that is very alien and very foreign. This is when I talked at the beginning of this podcast about encouraging families. I mean, it's as countercultural as you can get. I mean, the culture doesn't support it. The church certainly doesn't support it or think about it or talk about it. The idea that a family might work together as its primary vocation is a very foreign concept, and do it not because it makes more money, but because it builds relationships. It's a very foreign concept, but it's actually the only thing that's really going to last are those families that are intact generationally and passing on their faith and their values and their culture. That's actually what's going to withstand any election. It's going to withstand any kind of hard times or uncertain times ahead, any kind of catastrophe. It's going to be those families. Look, you can have everything stockpiled that you want, but if you can't get along, it's not going to do you much good.
Yeah.
So you have to think that you're doing something that is absolutely groundbreaking or generationally changing. You're changing a dynasty by choosing to do this. And you might not get the fruit of that right away. You might not, you might still be in that job that you don't like because you're paying down debt so that your children can inherit something that's, going to set them up for something better. The difference is that you're choosing a different goal with your life rather than it being the highest possible paycheck or vacations or travel or toys or things like that. You're choosing, no, I want relationship with my sons and my daughters. We want to build something that's going to last together.
Yeah, and that something that's going to last is going to shine light past right now. I mean, we all are called to shine light, to shine Christ's light into the world right now. But as the times are changing and we face more and more challenges, which you're talking about is building families that can stand, and those families ultimately make communities and bond together that creates resilience, in the face of changing times, in the face of darkness, where we can continue to be a solution, not just for ourselves, not just for our families, but for the world around us. In what is often, and I think becoming more so, darker times. And we have an opportunity to be a light by this rebuilding generationally past what we're doing right now. And, you were talking about the time it takes. And I just thought of a tree, like a walnut tree, and planting that tree. And it takes a while to get established, and it starts to bear a little bit of fruit. So you'll see some fruit early on, but you continue to nurture it, and it actually takes about 10 years to come to full maturity. And then it bears fruit for you in abundance year after year after year for decades.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we need that vision, I guess, to see that what we're doing right now is hard, is challenging. It is giving up a lot to return to this family economy, but the impact to our own families and really to God's kingdom and world and to Jesus is generationally.
Yeah, I really think it has to start. If we don't have our families working in this regard, I mean functional families, you can bring out any kind of program you want or any kind of whatever solution you want. If we can't get our families in order, then it's just not going to last. We're just going to continue to be individuals that are used and abused by whatever, the state, the corporations. We're going to be under the control of that. But families historically have been a place of safety, of refuge, of sovereignty, of security, and productivity. Oh, and that's another thing. I forgot to mention that. You don't have to just do something that earns a paycheck either. You could just do something that's productive. I encourage families, very truly, not just as a token, a suggestion, but planting a garden together, growing food together is probably the very first place you should start. If you're not growing food together, you should do it. Even if you have a thriving family business, grow your own food, because this is producing, you're bypassing the whole supply chain. You're bypassing all of the profits and the fiat currency and all of these things. That it's something that every family can do together. And traditionally, this is what every family did do together. So look for ways just to be productive, to save money. And if you're doing that as a family, that counts. It's absolutely part of a family economy.
There are very, very few things as rewarding as sitting around the dinner table together as family with the different fruits of harvest, not necessarily everything. I mean, many times on our plate, it's everything these days at this point. I remember when it was just one thing and then two, and sometimes, there's still, but when you sit together And you look and you get to share the stories of the season and everybody having contributed together. And sometimes there's funny stories and sad stories and frustration, but you come together with that harvest around the family table. That's such a picture of that family economy coming together, no matter where you're at in your journey and how much you're growing or raising. But as you begin to do that, that is so encouraging and so satisfying to share that together and share those stories around that food. And so I love that thought that you just gave of encouraging families, just grow a garden together, no matter what. And even if it's not about like, maybe you can't fill the pantry right now. And, maybe it's not as much replacement of other things as you would like, but just the act of doing that, you're taking control, but you're also building that family economy. And that's just one of the most beautiful places to celebrate together.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
Realize it. So we're about out of time, and Rory, you and I could really carry on for a long time. And I think we're just going to have to get together and do this again.
Absolutely.
We only dove a little bit into here. I want you guys to go get the book, The Family Economy. It's a good read. It's deep, but it's also short and to the point. Rory's just an amazing author in fleshing out some of these concepts and shining light and a path forward. So we'll give you some links in the show notes to check that out, the Durable Trades book. And Rory, where are a few other places that, how can people connect with you before we go?
Yeah, great. So thanks for asking. You can come to our website at gatherandgrow.us. I would encourage you, if you're interested at all in learning more about this, to sign up for our newsletter. This is something we started writing. This is part of our family economy. We started writing this together several years ago. The kids write articles. My wife writes articles. We include examples from other families who are trying to do this very thing, talking about these very subjects. And it's just a little bit of a follow along on things that we're sharing and learning about what we're doing here, both homesteading and faith and different types of topics like that. So it's called the Grovestead newsletter, and you can get it for free. It's just a donation kind of a thing. So feel free to just sign up for it and see if you like it. And if you like it, you can make a donation. If not, then you don't have to make a donation. But we'd love to connect with you that way. It's the main way that we stay in touch with our folks. We don't really do too much in the way of social media and things like that.
Yep. Yeah, lots of different ways to connect this way, and that's great. We will get all of that into the show notes so that you guys can follow that through. Go connect with Rory and the Groves family. And you guys, it's been great hanging with you, Rory. Just super bunch of fun. We'll have to do this again. Thanks for coming on today, and we'll see you all soon. God bless.
Thank you.